Let's take a live look at Fredericton, New Brunswick, where the same early spring ice storm that pummeled parts of Ontario is now moving across the Maritimes. Environment Canada has issued a freezing rain warning for parts of New Brunswick. Between 5 and 10 millimeters fell throughout the day, making a lot of roads slick and transportation difficult. More freezing rain expected tonight. Nova Scotia also taking a hit with heavy rains expected to continue into tomorrow. Schools in New Brunswick, PEI, and parts of Nova Scotia were closed today. Also a rough start to the week for some Quebecers. The freezing rain has left about 40,000 households without power. This is the scene right now where dozens of Hydro-Quebec crews are out working to try to get that power back on. The company says the outages were caused by downed trees. Freezing rain warnings remain in effect for several Quebec regions.
What did it look like when you're looking at
Pandemonium. It looked like a tornado actually went through. When we first saw it, it was like, wow. Like in the daylight, during night you can't see the full scope. So when it actually became daytime, the scope was insane.
Municipalities in Ontario also cleaning up after the storm, some even declaring states of emergency. Nearly 400,000 customers are without power. Communities working around the clock to respond, with crews prioritizing safety, cleanup, and power restoration for all. One of the communities hit hardest by this storm was Barrie, city about 90 minutes north of Toronto. And the CBC's Jamie Strashin joins us from there now with the latest. And Jamie, the cleanup effort must be a huge amount of work. Tell me what they're working on.
You're right, Ian. It's a massive cleanup effort. A lot of people today really getting a first-hand look at just the amount of damage that has been done across the city. And it really is more in those areas with those older trees, more of the older residential areas where, if you walk up and down the streets, you see, piles of limbs and branches that have fallen off trees. Literally, thousands of piles on residential streets across the city. You'll see a lot of houses where the hydro wire that connected to the house was literally, ripped off of the house by fallen branches. Lots of crushed cars, broken windows. And if you kind of look at, next to the tree branches today, the temperature has remained quite cool here today. It kind of looks like shards of glass, and people were told there was an ice storm coming, but I think when it actually hit, a lot of people I heard the refrain, it was a lot worse than we thought it was going to be. And when they got out and looked at the damage today, that really was what was true. One gentleman described it as like the sound of gunshots going off in the night, hearing these trees that kind of were falling and these branches that were falling one by one off a lot of these older growth trees in Barrie. We saw a lot of hydro crews out today working to kind of restore power, but in a lot of these residential areas, Ian, it's kind of a house by house situation. One house will have power, 3 houses won't. The next house will have power, and so on and so on. So it's going to be a long, slow process here. The damage here, quite extensive.
And the way you describe it, the sound of those trees falling in the middle of the night must have been so frightening. The amount of work involved in just cleaning up the scene behind you, and multiply that by however many other scenes there are. So you've been talking to people there. What do they need?
Well, first and foremost, they need their power back on, and that's going to be, as I mentioned, not something that's going to happen, today or maybe even tomorrow. There's still, across this huge swath of eastern Ontario where this storm hit, at last count before I came on air with you, about 300,000 people still without power. There was 800,000 at the peak of this storm, and Hydro saying, we said it was going to be later today. We're kind of revising that as we kind of get out and survey the damage. It's going to be a slow process, saying that power might not be on in parts of the province for at least another week. One other kind of byproduct of this, a lot of people dealing, Ian, with flooding because their sump pumps didn't have power. Those failed. So not only are they dealing with a lack of power, but they're dealing, a lot of people, with flooding in their basement. Not a pretty scene here on the ground in Barrie for those affected. The cleanup not going to be overnight. Could take as long as a week to get everyone's power back up. Probably much longer to clean up all of the debris around the city.
Okay, Jamie, thank you very much for that update.
Thank you.
in Orillia, just over 17,000 customers still without power, according to Hydro One. The estimated time to restore power to all those people, 2 days. And our next guest is one of those in the dark, along with her husband and her mother-in-law. Mala Sharma-Singh lives in Orillia, just northeast of Barrie. She works in Toronto, and Toronto is where she joins us from now. Thank you very much for doing this. So you've been without power, from what I understand, for 3 days. What's the impact been on you and your family?
It's been absolutely horrifying. I've never imagined that this would happen in our peaceful town of Orillia. My father had this property over 40 years, and we've never experienced anything like this. It was just absolutely shocking when it happened, and I felt my mother-in-law was saying, "Is this the end? Is this the end?" Because of all the crashing trees around the property and the ice hitting against the windows. It was quite frightening.
Yeah, well, so you shared with our producers that your mother-in-law has dementia. She is very uncomfortable in the dark. So tell us more about the impact this has had on her.
Well, and she kept asking the same questions over and over, like, what is happening? What are those noises? She was petrified. So I was worried that it would affect her heart. So I had to get her out of the darkness. We did light candles, but still she was not used to ever being under candlelight alone, so she was quite nervous. And it lasted for 2 days. So on the second day, we decided we have to stay in Toronto until this passes.
You've shared some pictures that you took outside of your house. So we've been playing them, but we're going to play them again here. And just describe generally the damage that you saw as you walked around your property.
Well, the first when I did try to take my mother-in-law off the property, the tree from the neighbor's home beside us had fallen and blocked the driveway. So we were in a panic situation of how to get out. And when we looked in the backyard, some of the trees that my parents planted when we were a child, massive trees, the huge branches had fallen and crashed to the ground. Luckily, we'd recently done renovations and put a metal roof on our home. So the big branches that fell on our deck, luckily just slid off the metal roof. My neighbor to the right, Kelly, unfortunately did not have the same protection, and there was some damage to her home. My neighbor to the left also had a lot of fallen trees, but so it was quite frightening.
And what have you been hearing from the city and Hydro One in terms of restoring power?
Well, I have no complaints about the city and Hydro One. I know they're working to the best of their ability. They've been up all night trying to battle to get the wires that have fallen, the electrical wires, fixed. Also, the trees, the big giant trees that line our area, many of them are in Ramara area, are over 100 years old, and they were weak and they've fallen all over the road. So the city has been working very tirelessly trying to get that fixed up, and I have no complaints about that. Hydro One, they haven't restored power in our area as yet, but I'm sure they will. I'm hoping in the next 1 or 2 days.
One of the interesting things about this story is that, you know, your home is in the middle of this ice storm without power. You're talking to us from your work in Toronto, where you have heat and light. Are you going to stay in Toronto tonight, or are you heading back home?
Yes, we've actually booked a hotel because of my mother-in-law. I don't want her to be fearful and asking if this is the end of the world. I mean, even when she kept saying it, I said, is it? I got quite scared, but I know it's part of global warming. But the community did come together really well, so I'm grateful for that.
And so for people who are watching across the country, what message do you want to give them about your family, your neighborhood, your community?
My community, I have to say there was unity in the community. To the left, my neighbors Ash and Judy, they came with a chainsaw, first of all, to cut away the tree on the driveway. Then they had to use a manual saw, and they did that. Our neighbors across the street, Gino, came with a canister of gas to put into the generator, which unfortunately did not start. Then my neighbor to the right, Kelly, she came and plugged in extension cord into her generator. So what wonderful neighbors we have. And in downtown Orillia, all sorts of restaurants were working in the darkness, cooking and giving away free slices of pizza. Another Patty's truck stop, they were giving away free food. The neighborhood just came together. And because Orillia does have a lot of elderly, everybody in our street was going, knocking on the doors, checking on the elderly, making sure that they're okay, taking hot meals that they cook sometimes outside on the barbecue or on the deck and delivering it. So our community is absolutely amazing, and they're a reflection of what goodness is all about and kindness.
Yeah, amazing, but not too surprising, Mala. Thank you very much for sharing your story.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.